My name is Rosemary Hale. I am 72 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, I was a school librarian in a small town on the East Coast. I built a quiet existence around books, order, and the rhythm of turning pages. When my husband Harold was alive, we lived in a modest house until his business flourished, and together we built a mansion worth $7 million. To me, it was not just a house. It was the proof of our years of sacrifice and love, a place where I believed our son, Daniel, would always feel safe. I thought it would be my legacy, the ground on which future generations of my family would stand. But the day before his wedding, Daniel looked me straight in the eye and said words that shattered me more than any betrayal I could have imagined. The best wedding gift is if you leave forever. I remember the way the room fell silent after those words, even though laughter and music from the rehearsal dinner echoed down the hallway. He did not whisper. He wanted me to hear, and he wanted others to hear as well. I stood there frozen, the glass of water trembling in my hand, and I could almost feel Harold's ring pressing against my finger, a reminder of what we had built together. The mansion we had poured our lives into was being spoken about as if it were nothing more than a bargaining chip. Before I continue, let me say this. If you have ever been underestimated, if your own family has treated you like a burden or an object, then this story is for you. Stay with me, because what happened after those cruel words changed everything. It is not only a story about betrayal, but also about how dignity, patience, and quiet strength can turn the tide when the world counts you out. I looked at Daniel's face that night. He wasn't sneering like Serena, his fiancée, who stood by him with her hand wrapped around his arm as if she owned him. He looked pale, tired, as though the sentence had been forced out of him, but he did not take it back. That was what pierced me most. He had once been a boy who clung to my skirts on the first day of school, terrified I would not return when I left him in class. Now he stood tall in a tuxedo and told me my absence was his greatest wish. A guest across the room had their phone out. I saw the faint glow of the camera. They caught the moment, my son's cruel demand, my silence, the way Serena smirked with satisfaction. At that second, I did not realize how important that recording would become. All I knew was that something inside me cracked, and I felt both the sting of humiliation and the weight of resolve pressing down on me. I set the glass down on the nearest table, though my hand shook. "If that's what you want," I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt, "then I will give you exactly that." I turned away before anyone could see my tears. My heels clicked against the polished floor, a small sound in the heavy hush that followed. Behind me, I heard Serena's voice, bright and mocking. "See? She finally understands, but she was wrong. I understood more than she ever could." That night, as I drove back to the mansion alone, the headlights slicing through the darkness, I could still hear Daniel's words echoing inside me. "The best wedding gift is if you leave forever," a sentence designed to cut me out, to erase me, to brand me as nothing more than an obstacle to their new life. My heart ached in ways I cannot fully describe. Yet beneath the ache, a quiet fire began to glow. I parked in front of the grand gates Harold and I had chosen together, iron wrought with curling patterns. For a moment, I sat there gripping the steering wheel, unable to move. I remembered the day Harold first walked me through this house. "This is not just walls and beams," he had said, kissing my hand. "This is proof of what we built together. One day, it will be yours, and Daniel's children will play here." His words came back to me like a blessing and a command. When I stepped inside, the silence of the house greeted me. The grand piano in the hall gleamed faintly in the low light, a centerpiece Harold had insisted on, even though none of us played well. "Every house needs music," he had said. That piano would later carry a message none of them expected, but in that moment, it was just another reminder of everything I stood to lose. I sat down in the living room, the same room where I had once hosted book club gatherings and Christmas mornings. The chandelier's crystals caught the dim glow from the outside lamps, scattering fragments of light across the walls. I took out a small notebook, the one I had carried for years, and opened to a blank page. With a pen in hand, I wrote down Daniel's words in large, steady letters. "The best wedding gift is if you leave forever." I underlined it twice. I wanted to see it in front of me, to face it rather than let it circle endlessly inside my head. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept writing. I listed the expenses I had covered for Daniel since he turned 18. College tuition, rent for his first apartment, even the down payment for his car. My hands remembered every check I had signed, every sacrifice Harold and I had made so that our son could live without the struggles we had endured. And now, he wished me gone. I pressed my palm over Harold's ring and closed my eyes. In that quiet moment, grief and anger braided together into something sharper, determination. If they thought I would walk away, they had forgotten who I was. I had endured loss, poverty, illness, and years of being overlooked. I was not just a machine that dispensed money at their command. And perhaps, in some cruel poetry, it was Daniel's words that finally forced me to remember that. The next morning, the mansion's gates would open to a different kind of music, the sound of reckoning. But that night, I sat in the silence and promised Harold, wherever he was, that I would not let what we built be swallowed by greed. The morning after Daniel's words, I moved through the mansion like a ghost. The sun spilled through the tall windows, painting long shadows across the marble floor, yet I felt no warmth. Every corner of this house carried a memory, and each one pressed against me like a reminder of how far my son had drifted. I had raised him here after Harold passed, pouring every ounce of love and discipline I knew into shaping him into a man who could stand tall. For years, I believed I succeeded. But now, I wondered if somewhere along the way I had lost him. I made tea the way Harold used to prefer, 2 spoonfuls of sugar, a slice of lemon, though Harold was gone and Daniel no longer cared for such rituals. As the kettle hissed, I remembered the nights I sat with Daniel at the kitchen table, helping him with spelling lists or calming him when nightmares made him cry. He would clutch my hand and whisper, "Don't leave, Mom." That little boy seemed like a stranger now. When Daniel met Serena, I tried to welcome her. She was beautiful, ambitious, polished, the kind of woman who knew how to command attention in any room. At first, I thought her confidence might steady Daniel, but slowly, I saw how he began to speak with her words, think with her priorities. I noticed how his phone calls with me grew shorter, more transactional. Holidays once spent here with laughter turned into brief visits, his eyes always drifting toward the door, toward her. That morning, as I sipped my tea, I replayed the look on Serena's face at the rehearsal dinner. She hadn't just stood by Daniel, she had orchestrated it. Her smirk carried victory, as if cutting me out was her final move before she claimed the mansion as her own stage. I could almost hear her telling her friends, "It's going to be our honeymoon house. $7 million of pure romance." The words made bile rise in my throat. Around 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Gregory Vaughn, Serena's father, standing tall in his pressed suit. His smile was too wide, the kind that carried calculation behind its charm. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around the foyer with eyes that measured value rather than beauty. "Lovely place, Rosemary," he said, running a hand along the polished banister. "Truly, it's a masterpiece." Harold did well. I stiffened at the way he spoke Harold's name, as if my husband were just another businessman to him. "Yes," I replied evenly. "He built this for us, for family." Gregory nodded, though I caught the flicker in his eyes. "Family," he repeated, as though tasting the word. "You know, in our circles, we like to think of marriage as a union of more than just two people. It's the merging of families, of legacies." He paused, lowering his voice as though sharing a confidence. "This mansion could be a strong foundation for that union. A symbol of stability." His meaning was clear. The mansion, in his view, was no longer mine. It was a prize, a dowry, a bargaining chip in his calculations. I folded my arms. "It is not a symbol. It is my home." Gregory smiled again, patient and patronizing. "Of course, for now. But once Daniel and Serena are married, everything becomes one. You'll see, Rosemary. It's the natural order of things. I wanted to throw him out. But instead, I simply stared at him, letting silence answer where words would only fuel him." His eyes darted toward the living room, where Harold's portrait hung above the fireplace. Gregory's gaze lingered, and for the first time, I noticed something beneath his calm demeanor. Desperation. When he left, the house seemed to exhale. I locked the door and leaned against it, my chest tight. It wasn't just Serena who wanted the mansion. Her entire family had set their sights on it. Suddenly, Daniel's cruel sentence made more sense. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was echoing their plan. I carried my tea to the study and opened Harold's old desk. Inside were photographs of Daniel's childhood. One showed him standing in the yard with Harold, both of them laughing as Daniel tried to push a lawnmower twice his size. Another showed us at Christmas, Daniel grinning as he tore open wrapping paper. I pressed my finger against the glass of the frame, whispering, "Where did you go, my boy?" The answer, I knew, was complicated. Serena had sharpened his hunger for prestige. Gregory had whispered about legacy and stability. But part of it was Daniel himself, craving the approval of people who promised glittering doors would open, if only he could shed his past. As afternoon slipped into evening, I sat in the living room and listened to the faint hum of the city outside. A storm gathered in my chest. The mansion that Harold had built with sweat and love was now spoken of as if it belonged to others. My son, the child I had raised alone after Harold's death, had allowed their voices to drown mine. And yet, beneath the ache, I felt something stir. For the first time in years, I thought of boundaries, not the kind that lock people out, but the kind that protect what matters most. Daniel had told me the best gift was if I left forever. Serena had smirked. Gregory had implied that the mansion was already theirs. Each word, each look, each visit was a hammer striking at the foundation of my life. But I was not ready to let them knock it down. That night, before I closed the curtains, I stood in the hallway and looked once more at Harold's portrait. His eyes, captured in oil and canvas, seemed to meet mine. "You built this for us," I whispered, "and I will not let them erase that." The crack between me and my son had widened into a fissure, but I sensed it was only the beginning. The following morning, I woke before dawn and walked barefoot through the mansion, the marble cool against my skin. The house felt almost sacred in those early hours, wrapped in silence except for the faint rustle of trees beyond the tall windows. $7 million. It was the figure people threw around when they spoke of this place, as if the value could be measured only in money. But to me, the mansion had never been about wealth. It was Harold's gift of permanence, a monument to the life we built together when the world told us we would not make it. I remember the day he first brought me here. The mansion was still under construction, wooden beams reaching for the sky, scaffolding lining the walls. Harold had dust on his jacket, his hair mussed from the wind, and yet his smile was that of a boy showing off a secret fort. He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the empty frame of what would one day become the grand hall. "Rosemary," he said, "this is not just for us. This is for Daniel, for when we're gone, and he needs to know where he came from." The memory struck me like a chord as I traced my fingers along the carved banister, now polished smooth by years of use. Harold had chosen oak, insisting it would last longer than either of us. And in the living room, he had placed the grand piano. He didn't know a single chord beyond chopsticks, but he believed every great house should carry music. Even silence has its melody, he liked to say. As I moved through each room, I saw not wealth, but echoes. The kitchen where I had baked Daniel's favorite apple pies, the study where Harold scribbled notes late into the night, the garden where Daniel had once chased fireflies with a jar in his hand. $7 million couldn't capture any of that. It was priceless because it was ours. But when Serena looked at it, she saw only luxury. I recalled overhearing her once, laughing with her bridesmaids over champagne flutes. "We'll call it our honeymoon house," she said, eyes sparkling with triumph. "Imagine the photos. Marble floors, chandeliers. It will look like something out of a magazine." The way she said it burned into me, as if the mansion was no more than a stage set for her vanity. I paused in the foyer and studied Harold's portrait above the fireplace. His painted eyes seemed steady, kind, but also stern. "Harold," I whispered, "they're treating your gift like a trophy." My voice cracked, though no one was there to hear. Later that afternoon, I walked into Daniel's old bedroom. The posters were gone, the shelves bare, but I could still picture him lying on the bed, tapping his pencil against a math worksheet, asking me to quiz him on vocabulary words. He had once sprawled across that bed with books piled around him, grinning proudly when he finally finished The Old Man and the Sea. I had told him the story was about endurance, about dignity in the face of loss. Did he remember? Or had Serena's world erased all that, convincing him that dignity was measured in assets and appearances? As I sat on the edge of his bed, I pressed my palms together and tried to steady my breathing. The mansion was meant to anchor him, to remind him that his roots were built on sacrifice, not showmanship. Yet now, it was being claimed as someone else's prize. When evening fell, I returned to the living room. The chandeliers glowed, scattering shards of light across the walls. I lit a single candle on the piano, the flame trembling as though it too carried the weight of memory. I laid my hand flat against the polished lid. "You built this for us," I murmured again, as if Harold could hear me. "It will never be theirs." But determination alone was not enough. Serena was clever, Gregory even more so, and Daniel. Daniel was slipping further into their orbit. I knew they had begun telling others that the mansion was destined to be theirs, as if I were just a tenant who had overstayed her welcome. Gossip traveled quickly in their circles, and soon even distant relatives looked at me with pity, as though I were a fragile woman clinging to something she could not keep. That night, as I walked up the grand staircase, I made myself a promise. If they wanted to see the mansion as a prize, I would remind them of its true worth, not by shouting or pleading, but by holding my ground with the same quiet strength Harold had taught me. They believed they could erase me, that I was nothing more than a fading shadow in the halls. But I was still here, breathing, watching, waiting. I paused at the landing and turned back toward the piano. Its black surface gleamed faintly in the dim light, solemn and expectant, almost like a sentinel. In time, it would carry a message none of them could ignore. For now, it was a symbol, standing tall in the heart of the house, silently promising that Harold's legacy was not so easily stolen. As I closed the door to my bedroom, I pressed my hand once more against Harold's ring. The mansion was not just worth $7 million. It was worth every tear, every sacrifice, every vow we had ever spoken. And if I had to stand alone to defend it, then I would. It was just after 11 when the phone rang. I had been sitting in the quiet of the study, reading one of Harold's old journals, when the shrill sound broke through the silence. The caller ID glowed with Serena's name. For a moment, I considered letting it ring, but I knew she wouldn't stop until I answered. I picked it up slowly, pressing the receiver to my ear. Finally, Serena's voice crackled, laced with irritation. I thought you'd gone to bed like an old lady. I said nothing at first. Her tone carried the smug confidence of someone who believed she already owned everything she demanded. I could almost see her pacing in her apartment, glass of wine in hand, rehearsing how to press me further. She didn't waste time. I'll make this quick, Rosemary. We need the keys to the mansion. The wedding's in 2 days, and Daniel and I have plans. Big plans. Guests will expect to see where we'll be living, and it won't look good if they find out you're still holed up there like a squatter. Her words landed like darts, sharp and deliberate. My grip tightened on the phone, but my voice stayed calm. This house isn't yours to claim, Serena. Oh, but it will be. Her laugh was cold. Don't be stubborn. Daniel deserves to start his married life with everything he needs. You had your time here. Now step aside gracefully before you embarrass yourself further. The audacity made my chest burn. For years I had given, supported, sacrificed. Now, this woman who had known my son for a fraction of his life demanded that I surrender the very walls Harold and I had built. I steadied my breath and spoke carefully. Didn't I mention the condition? There was silence on the line, just the faint sound of her exhale. What condition? She asked finally, her tone sharp. That the mansion remains mine until the day I choose to leave. Harold built it for us, for family, not for show. It will not be signed over as some wedding favor. Her laugh returned, brittle this time. You think your words matter? Do you know what people are saying already? They're whispering that you're losing your mind, that you're clinging to things you can't manage. Daniel worries about you, you know. He tells me sometimes you forget conversations, that you repeat yourself. It's sad, really. And when people hear enough of it, they start to believe it. My stomach tightened. It was not just a threat, it was a strategy. If she could convince others that I was incompetent, She could strip me of the mansion legally. I pressed Harold's ring against my finger, grounding myself. I am not confused, I said slowly, and I will not be bullied. Then be prepared, she replied, her voice turning icy. Because if you won't hand over the keys willingly, I'll make sure the world sees you as unfit. Everyone will know you're nothing more than an old woman out of touch with reality. Do you really want Daniel dragged into court, embarrassed in front of all his friends? The words stung, not because I believed them, but because I knew she had the ruthlessness to make good on the threat. Still, I refused to give her the satisfaction of hearing fear in my voice. If that is the game you want to play, I said, then you may be surprised by how strong I can be. There was a pause, followed by the sound of her swallowing a sip of wine. Strong, she sneered. You've lived off sentiment for too long, Rosemary. This house isn't about love or legacy anymore. It's about leverage, and I'm better at that than you'll ever be. The line went dead before I could respond. I set the phone down gently, though my hands trembled. For several minutes, I sat in the study, staring at the bookshelves Harold had built, breathing through the anger that threatened to consume me. Serena had made her intentions clear. She wanted me erased. I walked into the foyer and stood before the grand piano. Its surface reflected my weary face in the dim light. I traced the lid with my fingertips and whispered, "She thinks I'm weak, Harold. But she doesn't know me." The house felt alive around me, as though it listened. Every chandelier, every carved panel of wood seemed to echo Harold's promise. This is ours. My heart beat steadily against the rising tide of fear. Serena could spread her rumors, twist her lies, but she could not erase the truth. I climbed the staircase to my bedroom, each step steady despite the weight pressing down on me. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I pulled the curtains closed, sat on the edge of the bed, and clasped Harold's ring with both hands. For a moment, tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I repeated my vow under my breath. This is my home. It will never be theirs. That night, sleep came slowly. I drifted in and out, haunted by Serena's voice echoing in the dark. People already think you're losing your mind. But each time the fear crept in, I remembered Harold's words, his steady faith in me, and the fire that had begun to burn when Daniel asked me to leave forever. If they wanted a battle, they would find I was no easy target. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest. Serena's late-night threats still rang in my ears, but instead of cowering under them, I reached for a pen and a ledger. If she wanted to call me an old woman clinging to memories, then I would remind myself, in black and white, what I had carried all these years. I sat at the dining room table, its polished wood gleaming in the morning light. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of Harold's old clock on the wall. I opened a fresh page and wrote at the top, "What I have given." Then, line by line, I began listing. First, Daniel's college tuition, 4 years at a private university, nearly $80,000 in total. I remembered every envelope of financial aid paperwork. Every night I stayed up late, balancing my salary with Harold's business earnings to make sure the payments cleared. Then his first apartment, which I paid for when he was too busy chasing internships to manage rent on his own. $12,000. The down payment for his car, another $10,000. The wedding deposit, which Serena had treated as her entitlement, $35,000. And countless smaller things. Groceries slipped into his pantry when I visited. Utility bills paid when he was in between jobs. checks for emergencies. By the time I stopped writing, the total reached nearly $200,000. My pen hovered over the page as the sum stared back at me. 200,000 given, without complaint, without ever asking for repayment. And yet, my son had told me the best gift I could give was to vanish. My throat tightened, and for a long moment, I simply sat there with my hands pressed against the ledger. I wasn't tallying money for revenge. I was tallying love. Every dollar was another piece of myself I had poured into Daniel's life. And now I had to face that he no longer saw it as love. He saw it as obligation, as if I were nothing more than an ATM dispensing his future on command. The word echoed in my head, machine. I had let myself become one, and the machine was broken now. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't Serena. It was Diana, my younger sister. Her voice carried the comfort of home, a reminder that not everyone in the world had turned against me. "Rose," she said softly, "I've been thinking about Harold. I went through some of his old papers yesterday, and I found something. You should know about it." I straightened in my chair. "What kind of papers?" "It looks like he left a secondary will," she said, almost whispering. "A handwritten one. It wasn't filed officially, but he left notes about protections for you. He mentions the mansion specifically. There's also a reference to a sealed envelope in his safe deposit box. Do you still have the key?" I felt my breath catch. Harold had been meticulous about details, careful with every contract. If he had left something hidden, it was for a reason. "I have the key," I said quietly. "But the box, I haven't touched it since he passed." "You should," Diana urged. "If Serena and her father are circling, you'll need every defense Harold prepared. I can come with you." I pressed a hand against my eyes. Relief and sorrow tangled together. Harold had thought ahead, perhaps even predicted that Daniel might falter under pressure. My heart ached at the thought, but also burned with gratitude for his foresight. "Thank you, Diana," I whispered. "Come by tomorrow. We'll go together." After we hung up, I turned back to the ledger. The neat rows of numbers blurred as tears filled my eyes. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the realization of how invisible those sacrifices had become to Daniel. I had given him everything I could, but instead of gratitude, there was only dismissal. I closed the ledger and carried it into the study, placing it in Harold's desk drawer beneath the family photographs. The act felt ceremonial, as if I were storing not just numbers, but years of unacknowledged devotion. That evening, I sat in the garden with a blanket around my shoulders, the autumn air crisp and cool. I could hear distant laughter from the neighbors, but here in my own yard, silence stretched long and heavy. I tilted my head back, watching the stars appear one by one. "Harold," I whispered. I tried to be both mother and father. I tried to give him everything, but maybe giving too much made him forget the cost. The wind stirred the leaves, carrying the faint scent of roses from the far bed. It reminded me of the garden Harold used to tend, his hands rough with soil, his shirt damp with sweat as he insisted beauty mattered even when life felt hard. I smiled through the ache, recalling how he had once tucked a rose behind my ear after a long day, saying, "Even queens need their crowns." Now, sitting alone, I realized the crown he left me was not just the mansion, but the strength to defend it. Inside, the clock chimed 9. I rose slowly, gathering the blanket, and returned to the house. As I closed the doors and bolted the locks, I felt the weight of determination settle into my bones. They thought I would crumble under pressure, but they underestimated the resilience forged through years of sacrifice. Before I went upstairs, I opened the ledger once more, and under the final sum, I wrote in firm, deliberate letters, "The machine is broken." It was not just a declaration for Serena or Daniel. It was for me. A reminder that I was no longer an endless source of giving without boundary. My worth was not measured in what I could provide, but in the dignity I still held. I placed the pen down, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow, everything begins." The next day, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The heaviness was still there, but it had changed. No longer just sorrow, it had become fuel. Serena and Gregory thought I would wither under their pressure, but they were about to discover I could stand straighter than either of them imagined. I started in the most practical way, the locks. The mansion had 3 exterior doors, each with an old brass key. For years, I had never thought twice about them. Who would try to break into a house that already belonged to its family? But now, family was exactly the threat. By mid-morning, a locksmith arrived, his van rumbling into the driveway. "Morning, Mrs. Hale," he greeted, pulling out his toolkit. "What are we changing today?" "All of it," I replied, my voice firm. "Every door, every lock. And I want copies only for myself." He gave me a surprised look, then nodded. "Understood." As he worked, I stood watch, the metallic clinks and turns of his tools sounding like music to me. Each new lock felt like reclaiming a small piece of safety. By noon, the old brass keys were obsolete, replaced with heavy-duty deadbolts. I slipped the new keys into my pocket, the weight reassuring. From there, I moved to the bank. Mr. Lutz, a patient man with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted me at his desk. "Mrs. Hale, it's been a while. How can I help you today?" I lowered my voice. "I need to stop an automatic transfer. It was set up years ago for Daniel, but I can't allow it to continue." He tapped at his computer, then nodded. "Yes, I see it here. Monthly transfers. We can suspend them immediately, if that's your wish." "Yes," I said firmly. "From this day forward, nothing leaves my account without my approval." Mr. Lutz glanced up, his gaze thoughtful. "You're making the right call. Families sometimes take advantage. Better to keep things in your hands." I thanked him and walked out of the bank lighter than I had in months. The constant drip of money into Daniel's accounts had made me feel like a ghost fueling a future I wasn't invited into. Now, the flow was cut. That evening, I set up the small security cameras I had ordered weeks earlier, but never used. I placed one at the front porch, another near the back gate, and a third in the foyer. As I screwed them into place, my hands steady despite the chill in the air, I thought of Harold. He had always insisted that protecting what you love is an act of devotion, not paranoia. By nightfall, the mansion felt different. Not impregnable, but fortified. I sat in the living room with the monitors glowing softly on the coffee table, each screen showing a piece of my world under watchful eyes. For the first time since Daniel's cruel words, I breathed a little easier. But peace is rarely left unchallenged. 2 nights later, I saw the flicker on the porch camera. Serena's slim figure, wrapped in a coat, moved up the steps. She glanced around quickly before pulling something from her purse, a shiny brass key. She slid it into the lock, twisting. The camera captured every movement, her impatience clear when the lock resisted. I leaned closer to the monitor, my pulse steady. She tried again, jiggling the key, her face twisting in frustration. Then she pulled out another and another, copies, imitations. None worked. She cursed under her breath, then turned and stormed down the steps. The footage saved automatically to the cloud. I labeled it carefully, a quiet satisfaction filling me. One day, when she tried to paint me as weak or unstable, I would have proof of who truly broke boundaries. Still, the image stayed with me long after she left. The desperation in her eyes, the way she tried one key after another. She wasn't only hungry for control, she was frightened. Gregory's debts pressed heavy, I was sure of it. The mansion wasn't just a trophy for her, it was a lifeline. Later that night, I sat at Harold's desk and pulled out the ledger I had begun. I added another line beneath the totals, changed locks, canceled transfers, cameras installed. It wasn't just a list of tasks, it was a declaration. Every small act of defense reminded me I was more than an obstacle in their story. I was the author of my own. As the house settled into silence, I walked into the foyer and stood before Harold's portrait once more. His painted gaze seemed almost approving, as if he had known this moment would come. I pressed my fingers to the ring on my hand and whispered, "I won't let them turn me into their machine again." "The machine is broken, Harold, and I will not be repaired for their use." The mansion, with its new locks and quiet cameras, felt alive, standing beside me. For years, I had thought of myself as alone in defending it. Now, I realized, the house itself bore witness. Every door closed against intruders, every recording saved to the cloud. It was as if the walls themselves joined me in saying, "This is ours. It will never be theirs." It was past midnight when I woke to the faintest sound, an uneven scrape, like metal against glass. My heart lurched as I sat up in bed, straining to hear. For a moment, I thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but then came the thud of feet on the porch. I slipped on my robe, pressed Harold's ring against my finger for courage, and glanced at the monitor on the nightstand. The porch camera glowed with movement. 2 figures stood at the door. Even in the grainy light, I knew them. Daniel and Serena. My son's shoulders hunched as he fumbled with something in his hands. Serena hovered behind him, her lips moving fast, her eyes darting. I felt both fury and sorrow rise at once. Daniel, my Daniel, sneaking into his own childhood home like a thief. I hurried downstairs, every creak of the staircase loud in the stillness. My pulse thudded in my ears as I reached the foyer. The doorknob rattled again, then a dull clang as Daniel shoved his shoulder against the frame. I flicked on the chandelier, bathing the hallway in sudden light. The noise startled them. Daniel froze mid-motion, Serena clutching his arm as the lock held firm. I opened the door myself, my face calm, though inside my chest felt like a storm. "What are you doing here?" My voice was low, steady. Daniel's eyes widened. He looked younger in that instant, caught like a boy sneaking cookies before dinner. "Mom, Serena and we needed to check something." Serena cut him off, her tone sharp, rehearsed. "We have every right to be here. This house will be ours after the wedding. You're only delaying the inevitable. Hand over the keys, Rosemary." The gall of her words stung, but I didn't flinch. I stepped back, letting them see the monitor on the side table, the red light recording every second. "Do you really want to continue this conversation on camera?" I asked. Serena's jaw clenched. Daniel glanced at the blinking light, shame flickering across his face. He lowered his hand, the fake key still glinting between his fingers. I folded my arms. If you want to talk, then talk to me as people, not as burglars. But you should know, if you cross this threshold tonight, the police will be the ones greeting you." Daniel exhaled, his shoulders sagging. For a moment, he seemed on the verge of apology, but Serena's nails dug into his arm. "She's bluffing," she hissed. "She won't call anyone." "She's too worried about appearances." I held his gaze, not hers. "Daniel, listen to me. If you want to live in this house, there's only one condition. You stand on your own 2 feet. 6 months. No money from me, no tricks, no shortcuts. And in writing, you agree never to lay claim on this house." His lips parted, the words catching in his throat. Serena burst into laughter, sharp and scornful. "That's ridiculous. You can't dictate terms like some queen on her throne. This house belongs to family, and Daniel is your blood. He doesn't need conditions." I kept my voice calm, though my pulse hammered. "Blood is not enough when respect is gone. If you want this house, earn it, not through me, not through lies, but through your own effort. Until then, you will not step inside." Daniel shifted uneasily, torn between her grip and my words. His hand trembled slightly as he pocketed the useless key. His eyes, rimmed red in the light, flicked toward me with something like guilt, or perhaps longing for an easier past. Serena yanked at his arm. "We're leaving. She'll come crawling when she realizes she can't fight us." She spun on her heel, pulling him down the steps. He didn't resist, but he glanced back once, his face pale, before the darkness swallowed them both. I stood in the doorway long after their footsteps faded, the cool night air brushing against my cheeks. My hands trembled, though not from fear. For the first time, I had drawn a line, and they had seen it. Closing the door, I turned the new lock until it clicked, the sound echoing in the silent hall like a declaration. I walked to the grand piano, its surface catching the chandelier's light, and rested my hand on it. The keys inside were silent, but the moment felt like music, steady, resolute. In that quiet, I thought of Harold. He had always said strength didn't need to shout. Tonight, strength was in the calm refusal, in the condition I had set, in the truth captured forever by the little red light of the camera. I returned upstairs, exhaustion pulling at me. Yet beneath it, a strange calm settled in. They had tried to force their way in, and I had not faltered. I had stood tall, not as their machine, not as their obstacle, but as their equal. 2 days after Daniel and Serena's midnight visit, I received a call from Gregory Vaughn. His voice carried that same smooth tone he had used when he first stepped into my foyer, but now there was a sharpness underneath, like a blade hidden in velvet. "Rosemary," he began, "I think it's time we cleared the air. You've made things complicated for Daniel and Serena, and I'd rather we settle this like civilized people. Why don't I come by this afternoon? I'll bring a few documents to ease your mind." I knew better than to expect peace from him, but I also knew that shutting the door without hearing him would only give him more power to spread whispers that I was unreasonable. So I agreed, my voice calm. 3 o'clock. Don't be late." When the hour came, he arrived exactly on time, dressed in his finest suit, carrying a leather briefcase polished to a shine. His smile was broad as ever, but his eyes darted to the walls, the furniture, the chandelier, tallying value like a man in a casino counting chips. "Lovely as always," he said, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "Harold left behind a treasure." It's only right that it continues to serve the family well. I didn't offer him tea. I sat across from him, hands folded, waiting. He opened the briefcase with a practiced flourish, sliding out a stack of papers clipped neatly together. "Now, Rosemary, what I have here will put your mind at ease." You see, the mansion was technically tied to one of Harold's corporate entities. He may not have explained it to you. Businessmen often keep these matters quiet, but the property falls under a holding company. And when Harold passed, well, that company's rights flowed to Daniel as heir. He slid the papers across the table. The top sheet bore the name of a corporation I vaguely recognized from Harold's earlier ventures. I scanned the text, my pulse quickening. It stated that the mansion was an asset belonging to that company, now legally controlled by Daniel. I raised my eyes to Gregory. His smile deepened, the corners of his mouth twitching with victory. "You see? It's already his. Serena and Daniel are being generous, even letting you stay as long as you like. But in truth, you have no legal ground I let silence stretch, though inside me a storm brewed. Harold had spoken of every major decision, every transfer, every property we had. He had never once suggested the mansion was tied to his company. The man who looked me in the eye on the day of construction, who said this house was for family, would not have hidden it behind corporate veils. I picked up the document again, focusing on Harold's signature at the bottom. For a moment, my breath caught. The scrawl looked familiar, yet wrong. Harold's writing had always carried a certain steadiness, the curve of his R distinct, the line of his H precise. Here, the letters were slightly crooked, hurried, as though imitated. I looked Gregory straight in the eyes. "This isn't his signature." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, tighter this time. "It's notarized, Rosemary." Professionals have confirmed it. Perhaps Harold signed in a rush. The man was busy. I pressed my fingers against Harold's ring, steadying myself. Busy or not, I know my husband's hand. "This is a forgery." Gregory leaned forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Careful with your accusations. If you start shouting forgery without proof, people will only believe you're confused. And then, my dear, the courts may decide you're unfit to manage the estate at all." His words struck like a chill draft, calculated to unsettle. But instead of fear, I felt resolve harden inside me. They wanted me to panic, to doubt myself. But I knew Harold, and I knew this was not his mark. I slid the papers back across the table. "You can take your forged documents and leave. If you try to use them again, I'll be ready." Gregory's eyes narrowed. For the first time, the charm slipped, revealing something darker underneath. "You're playing a dangerous game. Do you really want Daniel dragged through legal battles? Do you want him humiliated in public? Be reasonable, Rosemary. Sign the deed over quietly, and none of this has to get messy." I rose from my chair, keeping my back straight. "This house is mine. It always has been, and it always will be. If you want to fight, Gregory, you'll get one. But you won't win." For a moment, the air between us crackled with tension. Then he snapped his briefcase shut and stood. His smile returned, thin and brittle. "Very well. But don't say I didn't offer kindness first." He walked out with measured steps, but the sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the house like a warning. I stood alone in the foyer, my hands trembling, but my spirit unbroken. I had seen through his trick. Harold's true legacy lived not in forged documents, but in my memory, in the vows we had shared, in the walls of this mansion. And now I knew, if they were willing to forge signatures, they would stop at nothing. That night, I sat at Harold's desk and opened the drawer where I kept the ledger. Beneath it, I placed a note to myself. Check the safe deposit box. Confirm Harold's words. Proof exists. I closed the drawer with care, as though sealing away not just paper, but determination. The battle was no longer just about greed. It was about truth, about memory, about refusing to let lies overwrite the life Harold and I had built. The morning after Gregory's visit, I felt the walls of the mansion watching over me more closely than ever. His forged papers still lingered in my mind, the crooked imitation of Harold's signature burning like a wound. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I needed allies, people who believed in me, people who could help me protect Harold's legacy. That was when Diana arrived. My younger sister had always been a whirlwind of energy, her presence filling any room she entered. That morning, she came straight from the train station, a scarf knotted at her neck, her eyes sharp with determination. She hugged me tightly, as if she could feel the weight I carried. "Rose," she said, pulling back to study my face, "you look like you haven't slept in weeks." "Sleep doesn't come easy when your own family tries to evict you," I replied, attempting a smile. She nodded grimly and set her bag down. "That's why I'm here." I went through some of Harold's old boxes after we spoke, and I found this from her satchel. She pulled out a yellowed envelope, its edges worn. She placed it carefully on the table between us. My breath caught when I recognized Harold's handwriting across the front. I opened it slowly, the paper crackling. Inside was a letter, written in Harold's firm, familiar script. "If anything ever threatens the house, Rosemary must know there are protections. The bank safe deposit holds the documents, password protected. Diana knows the key if Rosemary forgets. Use it to guard what is ours." Tears stung my eyes. Harold had thought ahead. He had trusted Diana with knowledge he had kept quiet, not because he doubted me, but because he wanted layers of protection. "He knew this day might come," I whispered. Diana placed a hand over mine. "He loved you too much not to prepare. And there's more." I found the little notebook he kept with passwords. Tucked in the back was one labeled safe. "I think it's for the box." I squeezed her hand, gratitude swelling in my chest. "You've just given me back my hope." That afternoon, we drove to the bank together. The familiar scent of polished floors and ink greeted us as we stepped inside. Mr. Lutz, the same officer who had helped me cancel Daniel's transfers, greeted us with his kind smile. "Mrs. Hale, Miss Hale, how can I help today?" "I need access to my husband's safe deposit box," I said, holding out the key. Within minutes, he led us into the quiet back room, the air cool and hushed. I slid the small brass key into the lock, my hand steady despite my racing pulse. The door opened with a click, revealing a tidy stack of folders. At the very top lay a sealed envelope marked in Harold's hand. "For Rosemary, if needed." I opened it carefully. Inside were legal papers, an agreement Harold had signed years ago with his lawyer, confirming that the mansion was removed from any corporate entity and placed under a trust solely in my name. The document was notarized, stamped, and clear. Diana let out a breath of relief. This makes Gregory's papers worthless. He can forge signatures, but he can't erase notarized truth. But there was more. Beneath the papers was a smaller, locked metal case. Diana produced the password from Harold's notebook, and together we turned the dial until it clicked open. Inside lay a contract, its edges crisp despite the years. My eyes widened as I read. Agreement nullifying Gregory Vaughn's business leverage over Harold Hale. It was a contract Harold had signed with Gregory long ago, dissolving any claims Gregory might have tried to use in the future. Diana shook her head with admiration. Harold really was 2 steps ahead of everyone. I pressed the documents to my chest, my heart full of gratitude and grief all at once. He saved us, even now. Back at the mansion, we laid the papers on the dining table, spreading them out like shields. The late afternoon sun slanted across them, illuminating Harold's name, his careful pen strokes, his foresight. Diana leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You're not alone in this, Rose. They want to make you look weak, but the truth is, you've got stronger ground than they do. And with this, even their lies can't stand." I looked at her, my sister, who had stood beside me through childhood scrapes, through Harold's funeral, through lonely holidays. "Thank you," I said softly, "for not letting me carry this alone." Her eyes softened. "We're blood, Rose. That's what family is supposed to mean." For the first time in weeks, I felt a crack of light break through the darkness. The mansion was no longer just a fortress I defended alone. Harold's foresight, Diana's loyalty, even Mr. Lutz's quiet support. All of it built a wall around me stronger than Serena's sneers or Gregory's forged papers. As evening fell, I placed Harold's documents in the study safe, locking it with deliberate care. Then I stood at the window overlooking the garden, where the roses bloomed faintly in the fading light. I thought of Harold, of his hands in the soil, of the way he had once told me, "Every root you plant today will hold the earth tomorrow." I whispered into the dusk, "Your roots are holding, Harold. I won't let them be torn out." And with that, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, the strength of new allies and the certainty that the battle for this house was far from over, but no longer mine to fight alone. The following week, after sleepless nights and endless thoughts circling like vultures, I forced myself out of the mansion and into the world. For too long, I had let the Vaughns paint me as fragile, isolated, even unfit. I knew that if I wanted to fight, I needed not only documents and family, but also the community that had once been my anchor. So I returned to the garden club. The garden club had always been more than flowers. It was where women of every age came together, tending soil while trading stories, holding one another up through illnesses, losses, and the trials that men often dismissed. After Harold passed, I had stopped going, too hollowed out to bear the cheerful chatter. But that afternoon, as I pushed open the wrought iron gate and stepped onto the familiar gravel path, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and longing. The scent of earth and roses hit me immediately. Women in sun hats bent over raised beds, their laughter carrying through the air. I paused, clutching Harold's ring, afraid of the questions they might ask, the pity they might offer. But before I could retreat, a familiar voice called out, "Rosemary Hale, is that really you?" I turned to see Eleanor Collins, her hair silver, her posture still elegant despite the years. She rushed toward me with open arms, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and soil. "It's been too long, my friend. We've missed you." Her warmth nearly broke me. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. "Nonsense," she said firmly, keeping her hands on my shoulders. "This place was yours before it was mine. And if anyone needs the club, it's you." We walked together to a shaded bench. Eleanor listened as I haltingly shared pieces of what had happened. The rehearsal dinner, Daniel's cruel words, Serena's demands, Gregory's forged papers. She didn't interrupt. She only watched me with kind, steady eyes as if every word I spoke planted another seed in her heart. When I finished, I felt drained, as though I had dug through stone with my bare hands. Eleanor reached over and clasped my fingers. "Rose, you've been carrying this all by yourself for too long. You're stronger than you think, but even strong women need allies. Do not let them isolate you." Her words filled me with something I hadn't realized I'd lost: permission to lean. "I don't know if strength is enough," I admitted softly. "They're clever, Eleanor. They're whispering to lawyers, neighbors, even the press. I can fight with memories, with documents Harold left, but the law requires a shield," she finished. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile born of experience. "As it happens, I know someone. My nephew's friend is an attorney, but more than that, he specializes in cases like this: elder financial abuse, coercion, manipulation. He's sharp, and he's not afraid of men like Gregory Vaughn." I inhaled sharply, relief and fear mingling in my chest. "An attorney? Eleanor, I don't even know how to begin." "You begin by trusting that Harold prepared you for this and that we, your community, will not let you fall. I'll call him tonight. His name is Donovan Weber." I repeated the name slowly, committing it to memory. A strange calm washed over me. For the first time, I could imagine standing in a courtroom without crumbling, because someone would be at my side. Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Rosemary, I've known you for decades. You have always been the one to bring soup to the sick, to read to the children when their parents were too busy, to tend roses in the hot sun when no one else wanted to. You are not weak. You are a pillar. Do not let Serena or Gregory make you forget it." Her words landed deep, and for a moment I saw myself not through the Vaughn's eyes, but through hers. Not a burden, not an ATM, but a woman who had lived fully, who had given generously, who still had more to give. We rose from the bench and walked slowly through the garden beds, the earth rich with the season's last blooms. The roses bent gracefully, their petals tinged with the first whispers of autumn. I bent to touch one, its softness startling against my fingertips. "Harold used to say roses endure even in the chill," I murmured. "And so will you," Eleanor replied. As the sun lowered and shadows stretched across the paths, I felt a steadiness settle inside me. I had walked through humiliation, betrayal, and fear, but here among friends and flowers, I had found something unexpected: healing. It was not the final victory, but it was a reminder that I was not alone. When Eleanor dropped me off at the mansion that evening, I lingered on the porch before stepping inside. The grand piano loomed in the hall, silent and waiting. I rested my hand on it and whispered, "I am not finished, Harold. I am gathering my army." That night, before I went to bed, I wrote a single line in my ledger beneath the growing list of defenses. Garden Club, Eleanor, Donovan Weber. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking in fear. Somewhere out there was a man who understood the law better than Gregory, and he was coming. And here in my own circle, I still had friends who saw me not as a machine, not as fragile, but as Rosemary Hale, a woman worth defending. 2 days after my conversation with Eleanor, I found myself sitting in the sunlit corner of a cafe downtown, waiting for the man whose name she had spoken with such conviction. I kept my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, though it had already gone cold. Every so often, I touched Harold's ring, the habit grounding me when my nerves threatened to take over. The door opened, and a tall man in his 40s stepped inside. His suit was simple but crisp, his stride steady, his gaze sharp without being cold. He scanned the room, then made his way toward me with quiet certainty. "Mrs. Hale?" he asked, his voice even, measured. "Yes." I rose slightly, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing. "I'm Donovan Weber." "Eleanor spoke highly of you, and I of her," I replied, settling back into my seat. He ordered a coffee, then leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "She told me you're facing pressure from your son and his fiancé's family regarding your property. Before we go further, I want you to know this. I specialize in elder abuse cases, financial coercion, manipulation, guardianship battles, you name it. You're not alone in this, Mrs. Hale, and you're not powerless." The calm authority in his tone eased something inside me. For weeks, I had been told I was fragile, confused, unfit. To hear the opposite felt like fresh air after a long, suffocating night. I took a breath and began explaining everything. Daniel's cruel words before the wedding, Serena's late-night phone call demanding keys, Gregory's forged documents, his threats disguised as charm, the automatic transfers I had canceled, the attempt to break in, caught on camera, and Harold's documents Diana and I had retrieved from the bank. Donovan listened intently, jotting notes in a leather-bound book, his brow furrowed not with doubt, but with focus. When I finished, he sat back, tapping his pen lightly against the page. "You've done more to protect yourself than most clients I've met," he said. "Changing the locks, cutting off transfers, installing cameras, that shows foresight. Harold's documents are a gift, but your vigilance is just as important. Still, we need to be prepared. Men like Gregory don't stop when you refuse once. They escalate." I nodded. He threatened to drag me into court. Said if I challenged his papers, I'd be called confused, unfit. "That's a common tactic," Donovan replied. "They want to corner you into guardianship. If a judge believes you can't manage your affairs, control of your estate could shift to Daniel. Or worse, to Serena and Gregory through him. But forewarned is forearmed. If they try to file for guardianship, we'll be ready." My throat tightened. "And if they succeed?" He shook his head firmly. "They won't. We'll have medical evaluations, testimony from credible witnesses, and evidence of your capacity. Judges respect facts, not gossip, and we'll show them you are perfectly capable of making decisions." I exhaled, the knot in my chest loosening. For the first time, someone had spoken of victory as though it were possible, not just a dream. Donovan leaned closer. "Mrs. Hale, I've seen women like you crushed because they had no one to stand with them. I don't intend to let that happen here. Harold's documents give us strong footing, but we'll also need a narrative the court can follow. They need to see not just paper, but a person, your story, your clarity, your strength. Can you do that?" His gaze was steady, testing. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I can." "Good." He slid his notebook closed. "Here's the plan. First, we'll get an independent medical evaluation to confirm your mental and physical capacity. Second, we'll organize your financial records, the canceled transfers, the ledger you've kept. Third, we'll prepare witness statements. Eleanor, your sister, perhaps even your banker. Anyone who can testify that you are in control. And Daniel?" I asked softly. "What if he takes the stand against me?" Donovan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Blood makes for painful battles. But remember, judges don't decide cases on sentiment. They look at patterns, facts, credibility. If Daniel speaks, we'll let the evidence show the truth. And sometimes," his voice softened, Even sons reveal doubt when forced to swear under oath. I have seen it happen, a lump formed in my throat. I thought of Daniel's trembling hand at the door, the flicker of shame in his eyes. Perhaps Donovan was right. We spoke for another hour, sketching timelines, considering scenarios. When at last we rose to leave, Donovan extended his hand again. "You're stronger than you realize, Mrs. Hale. Don't let them tell you otherwise." As I walked back to the mansion that evening, the autumn wind tugged at my coat, carrying the scent of leaves beginning to decay. I felt the documents in my bag, the weight of Harold's foresight pressing like a shield at my side. For the first time, I didn't dread the storm ahead. I was still afraid, yes, but now the fear was tempered with resolve. When I entered the house, the grand piano gleamed faintly in the dim light. I rested my hand on it, whispering, "I'm not alone anymore, Harold. I have allies. I have a plan." Upstairs, before bed, I added another line to my ledger, "Met Donovan Weber, our shield." And as I turned off the lamp, I felt a steady flame inside me, one that Serena's sneers and Gregory's threats could not extinguish. It began with a phone call from Eleanor early on a Thursday morning. Her voice was tight, urgent. "Rose, don't look at the papers." "Not yet. Let me explain first." But of course, I had already seen the headline. The morning edition lay on my porch, the black letters bold against white. "Wealthy widow declines. Mansion in jeopardy." My hands trembled as I picked it up. The article painted me as confused, unstable, too old to manage a property of such scale. It quoted unnamed sources close to the family, who whispered that my memory was slipping, that I repeated stories, that I had once nearly left the stove on. Lies, stitched together with enough thread of plausibility to make strangers nod and believe. As I read, my chest constricted. The photograph they had chosen was one from last year's garden fundraiser. My face turned mid-laugh, eyes unfocused, a moment of blur that now looked like dazed fragility. Underneath it, the caption, "Rosemary Hale, 72, struggling with capacity as family wedding approaches." I set the paper down slowly, my stomach heavy. It was Serena's hand. I could feel her presence in every line. She had always known how to wield appearances like weapons, and now she had drawn blood in the most public way. Eleanor's voice through the phone grew sharper. "Rose, don't let this rattle you. I'll have Donovan call you immediately. They want you shaken, humiliated, too tired to fight back." "That's all this is, I know," I whispered, though tears threatened. "But it still hurts." Within the hour, Donovan arrived at the mansion. He laid the newspaper flat on the table, his jaw tight. "Classic strategy," he muttered. "They leak a story, smear your reputation, and when they file for guardianship, the public has already been primed to believe it." I lowered myself into a chair. "They're painting me as if I've already lost." Donovan leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Which is why we don't just defend, we counter. Every rumor, every lie, we answer with proof. They want the world to see you as frail. We'll show the world your strength." But the attack didn't stop with the newspaper. By evening, my phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances, their tones laced with pity. And then, the real blow. A video began circulating online. I clicked the link, and there it was. Grainy footage of me at a family dinner months ago, pulling out my checkbook. The clip had been cut cruelly, leaving only Serena's voice saying, "She's basically our ATM," followed by my tired laugh. Taken out of context, it looked damning. The comments below were merciless. "She doesn't even deny it. Poor son, stuck with a mother who thinks money is love. This woman shouldn't be trusted with millions. I dropped the phone onto the table, my vision blurring. It felt as though Serena had reached into my chest and twisted. I had laughed that night to diffuse tension, to keep peace at the table. Now the moment was weaponized. My silence turned into consent. Donovan watched me carefully. This is manipulation at its ugliest. But remember, you have the original recordings from your cameras, the guest video from the rehearsal dinner, and soon we'll have Harold's documents authenticated. Lies are loud, Rosemary. Truth is quieter, but it lasts longer. Still, humiliation seeped into my bones. For decades, I had lived with dignity, never one for scandal or spectacle. Now my name was fodder for gossip, my face twisted into caricature. The mansion's windows seemed to look back at me with sorrow, the chandeliers dimmer, the piano silent as if in mourning. That evening, I sat alone in the living room, the newspaper folded beside me, the video replaying in my mind. I thought of Daniel. Where was he in all this? Did he read these lies and nod along? Or did he remember the mother who had carried him through sickness, through scraped knees, through late-night talks about his dreams? I wanted to believe there was conflict in him, but his silence cut deeper than Serena's noise. The phone rang again. Eleanor. Rose, listen to me. They can smear your name in headlines, but they can't touch the truth you carry. Don't break. You have us. You have Donovan. And Harold gave you more protection than they realize. Hold on to that. Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and pressed Harold's ring against my palm until it left an imprint. I reminded myself that shame was their weapon, but it did not have to be mine. Later that night, I opened my ledger and wrote, "They call me an ATM, but the machine is broken, and broken things cannot be used." I set down the pen and looked around the mansion, its walls scarred by whispers, yet still standing. They had launched their public attack, but I was still here. And tomorrow, I would begin to answer them, not with noise, but with strength, with proof, with the quiet resolve that Harold had planted in me long ago. The next morning, I carried a small bouquet of roses from the garden to the cemetery. The autumn wind nipped at my cheeks as I walked between rows of stone markers, the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes sounding louder than usual in the stillness. It had been years since Harold's funeral, but grief has no calendar. It returns whenever it wishes, raw and sharp. His grave was tucked beneath an old oak tree, its branches stretched like arms that had seen generations come and go. The stone was simple, just as Harold had wanted. Harold James Hale, beloved husband and father. 1939 to 2015. I knelt, brushing away a few leaves that had gathered across his name, and laid the roses gently at the base. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The weight of the last weeks pressed against me, heavier than anything I had carried alone before. Finally, the words came. "Harold, I don't know if you can hear me, but I need to talk to you." Daniel. Our Daniel. He told me the best gift I could give him was to leave forever. He said it the night before his wedding rehearsal, right in front of everyone. And I stood there, humiliated, broken. I wish you'd been there to stop him, to remind him of the boy he used to be. My voice cracked, but I kept going. Serena and her father have turned him against me. They've painted me as weak, confused, greedy. They've even spread lies in the papers. And Daniel just stands there, silent. Sometimes I think I see hesitation in his eyes, like he knows it's wrong, but he never speaks up. And I don't know if I've lost him forever. The oak tree rustled above me, a whisper of wind, as if the earth itself wanted to console me. I pressed my hand to the stone, feeling its chill. You built this house for us, Harold. $7 million of wood and stone. Yes, but also laughter, arguments, holidays, love. And now they want to strip it away, to treat it like a trophy. They don't understand. It's not just a mansion. It's us. It's everything we endured and overcame. A tear slid down my cheek and fell onto the stone. I'm so tired, Harold. Tired of fighting, tired of being strong, tired of being called a machine. I never wanted to be a machine. I only wanted to be a wife, a mother. I gave Daniel everything. Too much, maybe. And now he looks at me as if I am just an obstacle to his future. Was I wrong to give so much? Did I love him into forgetting what love means? My shoulders shook as the sobs came, quiet but relentless. For years, I had held back the tears, swallowing them in silence. Here, at Harold's grave, I let them fall. I let the earth take them. Behind me, footsteps approached. I turned and saw Diana, her scarf whipping in the wind. She carried a thermos of coffee, her expression soft but steady. I thought I'd find you here, she said, lowering herself onto the bench beside the oak. I wiped my eyes quickly, embarrassed, but she only reached over and squeezed my hand. Don't hide your tears from me, Rose. They're the proof you're still alive. We sat quietly for a while, the breeze carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Finally, Diana spoke again, her voice low. You know, Harold once told me he worried Daniel might grow into a man too easily swayed. He didn't say it to hurt you. He said it because he knew how deeply Daniel needed guidance. And Harold trusted that you'd be the one to hold the line when he couldn't. I turned to her, startled. He said that? She nodded. I never told you because I didn't want to burden you. But seeing what's happening now, I think Harold knew this storm might come, and he believed you'd be strong enough to face it. Her words pierced through me, mingling with the ache in my chest. Perhaps Harold had always sensed that love could not shield Daniel from every temptation. Perhaps he had left me not just the mansion, but also the responsibility to guard its meaning. I looked back at the stone, the roses bright against the gray. I don't feel strong, Diana. Not here. Not now. She tightened her grip on my hand. Strength isn't about never crying. It's about standing back up after. And you've already done that more times than you realize. The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the path. I closed my eyes, listening. In the rustle of branches, I almost heard Harold's voice. Calm, steady, reminding me of the vows we had shared. This house is ours, Rose. No matter what storms come, remember that. When I finally stood, I pressed a kiss against my fingertips and laid them on the stone. I'll keep fighting, Harold. Not just for the house, for us, for what we built. Diana walked with me back to the car, her arm looped through mine. The world outside the cemetery still held battles, but for a few moments, I carried with me the stillness of Harold's presence, the strength of his foresight, and the reminder that even in grief, I was not entirely alone. The day after visiting Harold's grave, I received a letter slipped into my mailbox. The envelope bore the seal of the county court. My hands shook as I tore it open, scanning the dense print until the words pierced me. Petition for guardianship hearing. Gregory and Serena had filed papers, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. They wanted Daniel appointed as my legal guardian. I sat at the kitchen table, the letters spread before me, my chest tight. Guardianship. It was the weapon Serena had threatened over the phone. If the court believed their lies, I would lose everything. The mansion, my finances, my independence. Gone. I whispered Harold's name, as if saying it might steady the floor beneath me. By afternoon, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, a woman in a gray blazer stood there with a clipboard pressed against her chest. Her smile was polite, but practiced. "Mrs. Hale? My name is Miss Schultz. I'm a social worker with the county. I've been asked to conduct an evaluation regarding the guardianship petition I let her in," my heart hammering. She walked through the foyer, her eyes sweeping over the grand piano, the portraits on the wall, the gleaming staircase. She made notes quickly, every stroke of her pen sounding like a judgment. We sat in the living room. She adjusted her glasses and began. "Mrs. Hale, these questions are routine. I need to assess your ability to manage daily tasks, your financial decisions, your memory. Do you understand?" "Yes," I replied. My voice trembled only slightly. She started with simple questions. "What year is it? Who is the current president? Can you tell me today's date?" I answered each one clearly, my voice steady. She moved on to finances, asking how I managed my accounts, if I paid my bills on time, if I understood the value of my property. I explained the canceled automatic transfers, the ledger I kept, the documents Harold had left. I could see her eyebrows rise as she realized I wasn't the confused old woman Serena had painted in gossip. Still, I knew words weren't enough. Evidence mattered. So when she asked about recent threats, I stood, walked to Harold's desk, and pulled out the folder Donovan had prepared. Inside were copies of the forged documents Gregory had shown me, side by side with Harold's notarized trust papers. There was also a USB drive Donovan had arranged to authenticate, containing footage from the cameras, Serena at my porch, fumbling with fake keys. I laid everything on the coffee table. They are trying to erase me. But the proof is here. My husband safeguarded me, and I have safeguarded myself. I am not incompetent. I am not confused. I know exactly what is happening. For the first time, Miss Schultz looked at me not as a case, but as a person. She set down her pen. "Mrs. Hale, I need to be impartial, but I can tell you this. Many people crumble under situations like this. You haven't." That speaks loudly. Before I could reply, the door opened, and Daniel and Serena stepped in. My son looked uncomfortable in his pressed suit, while Serena wore her confidence like a blade. She greeted Miss Schultz sweetly, as if the whole visit had been arranged for her benefit. "Mrs. Hale," Miss Schultz said carefully, "would you mind if I spoke with your son and his fiancée for a moment?" I gestured for them to sit, though my stomach churned. Serena launched into her performance instantly. "You see, Ms. Schultz, we're only worried for Rosemary. She forgets things. She left the stove on last month. She repeats herself. We just want to protect her. And of course, the mansion. It's too much for her to manage." Daniel shifted beside her, his jaw tight. I studied him, searching for any flicker of doubt. His hands clenched in his lap, and I noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. My heart twisted. He was conflicted, but he let Serena speak for him. Miss Schultz listened quietly, then turned back to me. "Mrs. Hale, would you like to respond?" I stood tall, lifting Harold's notarized trust documents, the forged copies Gregory had waved in my face, and the still images from the camera footage. They call me forgetful, yet here I stand with more clarity than all their lies combined. Harold built this house for us. It will never belong to manipulation. My voice didn't rise, but it carried through the room. Serena's eyes flickered, just for a second, betraying nerves beneath her mask. Daniel's gaze fell to the floor. Ms. Schultz gathered her notes. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale. I will be compiling my report. The court will consider all the evidence presented, but let me assure you, I've seen cases where appearances were twisted. Paper and proof matter more than whispers." When she left, the house seemed to exhale. Serena stormed out without another word, dragging Daniel behind her. He glanced back once, his eyes rimmed with something I couldn't name. Regret, perhaps, or shame. As the door closed, I sat on the piano bench, laying Harold's documents on the polished lid. My hands trembled, but my spirit did not. They had tried to frame me as frail, but today I had shown strength, and someone impartial had seen it. That night, I wrote in my ledger, "Guardianship threat answered. Truth stronger than rumor." The guardianship hearing had not yet been scheduled, but the Vaughns wasted no time setting another trap. A week later, Donovan arrived at the mansion with a grim look on his face. He set a folder down on the dining table and rubbed his temples. "They're escalating," he said. "Gregory has produced new witnesses. A neighbor claims you wander outside at night, confused, and they've brought in a doctor, Dr. Lehman, who says he evaluated you and found signs of memory decline." My heart sank. I've never even met this doctor. Donovan nodded. "Exactly. He's a hired mouthpiece. They're trying to build a narrative. The frail widow, incapable of understanding her own life. We'll challenge it, but you need to prepare yourself for more lies." That evening, as if on cue, Gregory came swaggering up the walkway with Serena at his side. I met them at the door, refusing to let them past the threshold. Gregory held a thick envelope in his hand, his grin wide. "Mrs. Hale," he said smoothly, "you really should stop fighting. It's becoming embarrassing. Here, testimonies from people who've noticed your decline, and a medical report to prove it." He held the envelope out, but I didn't take it. "Forgery didn't work, Gregory. Now you try slander. You must be running out of tricks." His eyes narrowed, though his smile never faltered. "A court doesn't need to know you perfectly. They just need doubt. And I'm very good at planting doubt." Serena smirked beside him, her hand curled possessively around Daniel's arm. My son's face was pale, his jaw set tight, but he said nothing. I wanted to reach through the space between us, shake him free of their grip, remind him of who he was. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. After they left, Donovan shook his head. "We'll discredit Lehman easily, but the neighbor, even a false story can carry weight. We need something stronger." The next day, I received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Green, the pharmacist from down the street, stood nervously at my door. He looked thinner than I remembered, his eyes darting as though he feared being followed. "Mrs. Hale," he began, wringing his hands, "I owe you an apology." I ushered him inside, confused. He sat stiffly on the edge of a chair, twisting his cap in his hands. "Gregory came to me weeks ago. He wanted me to say you'd been picking up prescriptions for memory medication. He offered money, pressured me. I didn't agree at first, but he threatened my job, my family. So I signed a statement I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." The words hit me like a rush of wind. For a moment, anger threatened to boil over, but then I saw the shame etched into his face. He was another victim of Gregory's bullying. "Why come to me now?" I asked gently. He pulled a folded letter from his pocket. "Because I couldn't sleep." My conscience won't let me. I wrote this statement withdrawing my testimony. I'll sign it before a notary. And if needed, I'll testify in court that Gregory coerced me. I took the letter, my fingers trembling as I read his words. They were simple, direct, and damning to Gregory. Relief swept through me, though sorrow quickly followed. Sorrow that men like Gregory could twist others so easily. "Thank you," I said softly. "It takes courage to admit a mistake. Harold always said courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing what's right in spite of it." Mr. Green's shoulders sagged, as if a great weight had lifted. "I only hope it's not too late." After he left, I called Donovan. He listened, then let out a rare laugh of satisfaction. "This is gold, Rosemary." A coerced witness turning back? Courts take that very seriously. Gregory just tightened the noose around his own neck. That night, I sat at Harold's desk and opened the ledger once again. Under the growing list of battles, I wrote, "Green returned, truth finding its way." Still, unease lingered. Gregory had shown his hand. He would forge, lie, coerce, and bribe without shame. How many more traps would he set before this was over? Later, I walked out to the garden, the cool air wrapping around me. The roses had begun to fade with the season, their petals curling at the edges, but even in decline, they held a kind of stubborn beauty. I knelt beside one bush and touched a flower gently. "We're alike, you and I whispered. "Bruised, but not gone." The stars above were cold and distant, but they steadied me. If Gregory thought I would crumble under false testimonies, he had underestimated the strength of memory, of conscience, of people willing to tell the truth. The mansion loomed behind me, dark but solid. Every wall, every window carried Harold's promise, and as I stood to return inside, I knew that the Vaughn's traps might multiply, but so would my resolve. That night, long after the world outside had gone quiet, I sat alone in the living room, with only the dim glow of a lamp for company. The papers Donovan had left were spread across the table: witness statements, bank records, Harold's trust documents. But my eyes could no longer focus on them. Instead, they blurred into meaningless lines as tears threatened to rise again. For weeks, I had stood my ground. I had changed locks, installed cameras, gathered allies, and faced down forged documents and lies. But that evening, the weight of it all pressed so heavily on me that I could hardly breathe. My hands trembled as I picked up the ledger where I had been writing notes of each small victory. For the first time, I wondered if those victories mattered at all. I rose slowly and walked to the hallway, where the portrait of Harold still hung above the fireplace. His eyes, steady and kind, looked down at me as if expecting me to be strong. But strength felt foreign in that moment. I pressed my forehead against the frame and whispered, "I can't do this without you. I'm so tired of being the only one left to fight." The silence answered back, heavy and merciless. I sank onto the couch, clutching a photograph of Daniel as a boy. He was no older than 6 in the picture, standing on the front steps with scraped knees and a toothy grin, holding a kite Harold had made. I remembered how he had begged me to run with him in the yard, his laughter filling the air. "Don't let go, Mom," he had cried, and I hadn't. Not then. But somewhere along the way, I had loosened my grip without realizing it, and Serena had taken my place. Now he stood beside her, silent when she humiliated me, silent when Gregory forged papers, silent as rumors spread like wildfire. My heart ached so fiercely, it felt as though it might crack in two. I covered my face with my hands, letting the tears come. They fell hot and unrestrained, dripping onto the photograph until Daniel's smiling face blurred. I cried for Harold, for the life we had built, for the son who no longer seemed to remember the sacrifices made for him. I cried because love, once so certain, had become a weapon turned against me. The house creaked in the wind, the sound almost like footsteps. I looked up suddenly, half expecting Serena to be standing there, demanding keys again. But the mansion was empty, silent except for my own sobs. I whispered into the stillness. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am broken. The words hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. And then, as if to answer, the phone rang. I startled, wiping my eyes, and reached for it with unsteady hands. Eleanor's voice spilled through the line, warm and steady as ever. "Rose? I just wanted to check on you. I had a feeling tonight might be hard." My throat was too tight to reply at first. She must have heard the strain in my breathing because her tone grew firm. "Don't you dare give in to them. That's exactly what they want, to see you collapse. They know if they can break your spirit, the rest will follow. But you're stronger than that. You've always been stronger than that," I managed to whisper. "I don't feel strong, Eleanor. I feel like I'm drowning." "You're not drowning," she said. "You're standing in a storm, yes, but you've got roots deeper than they can reach. Remember Harold. Remember what he built with you. And remember that you're not alone. You have me. You have Diana. You have Donovan. We're with you, Rose." Her words poured into me like a balm, soothing the jagged edges of despair. I closed my eyes, clutching the phone to my ear, letting the sound of her conviction fill the empty spaces where mine had faltered. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. The tears had stopped, replaced by a weary calm. I placed Daniel's photograph back on the table and whispered to it, "I won't let go." Not yet. The night was still heavy, but something inside me had shifted. I realized that breaking down didn't mean the end. It meant I was human. It meant I loved deeply enough to hurt. And it meant that even in my weakness, I could rise again. Before heading upstairs, I wrote one more line in my ledger, though my handwriting wavered. "They want me broken, but I am still here." As I turned out the lamp, the mansion lay in shadow, but I felt Harold's presence in the walls, the floor, the piano waiting silently in the hall. They could spread lies. They could forge papers. They could drag me to court. But as long as I could still rise from nights like this, they could not win. The morning after that night of tears, Diana arrived with a determined look that reminded me of our mother. She carried a small box tucked under her arm, her cheeks flushed from the brisk air. "I couldn't sleep," she said as soon as I opened the door. "I went through more of Harold's things. And Rose, you need to see this." We sat at the dining table, the early light spilling across the wood. Diana placed the box carefully before me, almost reverently, as if it carried more than paper. She opened it and pulled out a slim flash drive sealed in an envelope. Across the front, in Harold's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Rosemary. Protect the house." My breath caught. My fingers trembled as I touched the envelope. "How long has this been here?" "I found it inside the lining of Harold's old briefcase," she explained. "It was tucked so deep I nearly missed it. He wanted it hidden, but safe." I broke the seal and slid the flash drive into my laptop. The screen lit up, and a single file appeared. Message.mp4. Diana and I exchanged a look. Then I clicked play. Harold's face filled the screen. His hair was thinner, his skin pale from the illness that had claimed him, but his eyes burned with the same steady light I remembered. He sat at his desk, the one I still used, his hands folded before him. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice rough but firm, "it means I'm gone, and someone is threatening what we built. Rose, I know you. I know you'll want to shoulder this quietly, to endure rather than fight. But you must fight. This house is not just walls. It is our legacy. If anyone, even family, tries to strip it from you, show them this." He lifted a folder into view, opening it to reveal the trust documents and the nullification contract he had signed with Gregory years ago. "These papers confirm the house is yours alone. And this recording my words, my intent. No court can mistake it. You are the rightful owner, Rose. Don't let them reduce you to a machine, to a provider. You are the heart of this family. And if Daniel forgets, remind him, with love if you can, with strength if you must." The video ended, the screen fading to black. I sat frozen, tears sliding down my cheeks. Hearing his voice again was like having him in the room. The weight of his foresight pressed on me, heavy but steadying. He had known this storm might come, and even in dying, he had prepared me for it. Diana reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "This is it, Rose. This is the proof. Courts can dismiss hearsay. They can question witnesses, but they cannot deny Harold's own recorded words paired with notarized documents." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My heart swelled with gratitude and grief, colliding in a way that left me breathless. "He was still protecting me," I whispered. That afternoon, Donovan arrived. We showed him the flash drive. He watched the video in silence, his face unreadable until it ended. Then he exhaled, long and low, and leaned back in his chair. "This," he said firmly, "is a turning point. Video testimony like this, authenticated, admissible, it carries extraordinary weight, especially when paired with notarized documents. Gregory will sputter, Serena will deny, but this is Harold speaking directly to the judge, and no amount of gossip can drown that out." For the first time, Donovan allowed himself a faint smile. "Rosemary, you've been fighting uphill. Today, the ground leveled." Relief washed through me, but alongside it came fresh sorrow. I played the video again later, alone this time. I studied Harold's face, the way his hands clasped as if holding himself together through pain, the flicker in his eyes when he said, "You are the heart of this family." "Harold," I whispered, touching the screen, "I miss you more than words can say. But thank you. Thank you for believing I could still stand when everything felt broken." That evening, Diana and I sat in the living room with cups of tea, the flash drive safe in Donovan's possession for forensic authentication. The chandeliers glowed above us, casting warm light across the piano. "You're not alone, Rose," Diana said softly. "Harold's still here, in his way. And so am I." I smiled through my tears. For weeks, the Vaughns had tried to paint me as fragile, alone, disposable. But here, in my home, with my sister beside me and Harold's voice echoing through time, I felt something different. Not just strength, but hope. Before going to bed, I wrote in the ledger once more, "USB found. Harold speaks still. The house is defended." Then I set down my pen, turned off the lamp, and let the mansion rest in silence, knowing that tomorrow I would rise not just with my own resolve, but with Harold's voice as my shield. The night before the hearing arrived like a storm pressing against the walls of the mansion. I could feel it in the air, thick and restless. as if the house itself braced for what was coming. The chandeliers glowed faintly, the piano in, the hall silent as a sentinel. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching the banister Harold had polished with his own hands, the framed photographs of Daniel as a boy, the roses in the vase that Diana had brought earlier. Tomorrow, everything would be tested. Donovan had spent the entire afternoon with me, reviewing documents one last time. Now, as twilight deepened, he remained in the study, spreading papers across Harold's desk with the precision of a man preparing for battle. He looked up as I entered, his expression calm but edged with focus. "Rosemary," he said, "we're ready. We have Harold's video authenticated, the notarized trust, Green's recantation, your financial ledger, and medical reports proving your clarity. Tomorrow, we present all of it. But there's one more piece I need you to hold on to, your voice. Judges look at paper, yes, but they also look at the person standing in front of them. Speak simply, speak firmly, and speak from the truth only you carry." I nodded, though my stomach churned. "I can do that." He studied me for a moment, then reached into his briefcase. "There's something else I haven't told you yet." Just in case, he placed a folder on the desk. Inside was a contract already signed by a reputable real estate investment group. It was an assignable purchase option, an agreement that, should the court rule in our favor, allowed me to sell the mansion immediately for cash. The buyer's deposit was already wired. I stared at the papers. Sell the mansion? So soon? Donovan's gaze was steady. "It's not surrender, Rosemary. It's protection. Gregory's strategy hinges on the house itself. If you choose to sell, you turn their weapon into your shield. By the time they recover from the shock, the mansion will no longer be theirs to covet." My hand lingered on the folder. The idea of letting go of Harold's creation broke something inside me, yet at the same time, I understood. Selling wasn't erasing, it was reclaiming. And if it meant freedom from Serena and Gregory's grasp, perhaps it was the quietest, sharpest form of justice. "Think of it tonight," Donovan said gently. "You don't have to decide now. But if you want this option, it's ready." As he gathered his papers, I walked to the window. The garden was dark, the roses little more than shadows swaying in the wind. I whispered Harold's words in my mind. "This house is ours, no matter what storms come." Later, after Donovan left, the silence of the mansion pressed close again. I sat at Harold's desk, the lamp casting a circle of light across my ledger. Slowly, deliberately, I began to write a letter. "To Daniel," I wrote. "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to tell you what I cannot always say aloud. I am not fighting you, my son. I am fighting for us, for the love that built this house, for the father who gave everything, for the truth that should never be buried beneath greed. They call me an ATM, a machine, but the machine is broken. I am not a source of endless giving. I am a woman, your mother, who deserves dignity. One day, I hope you'll remember that." I set the pen down, my hands trembling. The words looked stark against the page, but they carried the truth of my heart. I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, sealing it quietly. Before heading upstairs, I walked to the piano. Its polished surface reflected the dim light. I laid the envelope on top and whispered, "If tomorrow breaks me, let this remain." Then, with a sudden impulse, I retrieved the camera recordings Donovan had uploaded to a secure cloud. Among them was the rehearsal dinner clip, the moment Daniel told me the best gift was to leave forever. That raw cruelty, captured by a guest's phone, had spread humiliation. But Donovan had also secured the full version, the uncut footage showing Serena smirking, Gregory prompting Daniel, the laughter of guests that followed. It was proof not of my weakness, but of their malice. Tomorrow, that too could stand in court. I saved the files to a separate drive and placed it carefully in my bag. Another piece of the shield. When I finally climbed into bed, the mansion seemed to hold its breath with me. The wind rattled faintly against the windows, as if the house itself whispered encouragement. I touched Harold's ring, feeling its cool circle press into my palm. "Stand with me tomorrow," I murmured into the dark, just once more. Sleep came slowly, fitful, filled with fragments of memories. Daniel as a child clutching my hand, Harold laughing in the garden, Serena's voice like a knife. But when dawn broke, pale light spilling across the floorboards, I rose with a steadiness I hadn't expected. The night of doubt was over. The day of truth had come. The courthouse stood tall and cold against the morning sky, its stone facade catching the pale light. Diana walked beside me, her arm looped firmly through mine as though she were afraid I might fall. Donovan carried his briefcase, his steps measured, his face set with quiet determination. Inside, the halls hummed with voices and footsteps, the echo of justice both feared and sought. When we entered the courtroom, the air felt heavy, almost sacred. Dark wooden benches lined the room, and at the front sat the judge, her gaze calm but piercing. Gregory was already there, whispering to Serena, who wore her confidence like armor. Daniel sat on Serena's other side, his head lowered, his hands clasped tightly. He did not look at me. The bailiff called for silence. The hearing began. Gregory's lawyer rose first, a man with a polished smile and a voice that carried easily across the chamber. "Your Honor, we are here today to address the declining capacity of Mrs. Rosemary Hale. My clients, Daniel Hale and his fiancée, Serena Vaughn, are deeply concerned for her well-being. Evidence will show she has grown forgetful, confused, and unable to manage her estate responsibly. For her safety and for the preservation of her assets, we petition for guardianship." His words fell like stones into the silence. Serena nodded at every phrase, her chin high, her expression rehearsed. Gregory leaned back, smug, as if victory had already been written. Donovan rose smoothly. His presence filled the room, not with volume, but with steadiness. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hale is not only fully capable of managing her affairs, she has been targeted by manipulation, coercion, and forgery at the hands of those who would profit from her loss. We will present evidence that shows she is of sound mind, responsible in her finances, and the rightful owner of the mansion her late husband entrusted to her. What stands before this court is not incapacity, but exploitation." The judge nodded once, her eyes flicking toward me briefly, weighing. The first witness was called. A neighbor, coaxed by Gregory, who testified that he had once seen me standing outside late at night, looking lost. He spoke hesitantly, as if unsure of his own words, but Gregory's lawyer pressed him to repeat the claim. My stomach tightened, but Donovan leaned over and whispered, "Remember, Rose. It's smoke. We'll clear it." Then came Dr. Lehman, the physician Gregory had hired. He testified that in his professional opinion, I showed signs of cognitive decline. He cited no medical records, no exams, only vague impressions. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, forcing myself to meet his eyes. They slid away from mine, guilty, evasive. Through it all, I felt the weight of the judge's gaze on me. as if she were measuring not just the words spoken, but my presence, my composure. I held myself upright, though inside my chest my heart pounded like a drum. Finally, Gregory himself was called. He strode to the witness stand with all the swagger of a man certain of his power. He spoke of Harold's company, of alleged documents tying the mansion to corporate holdings, of his concern that I had grown paranoid. His tone dripped with false sympathy, each phrase carefully crafted to mask the greed beneath. But the moment that cut deepest came when Daniel was called to the stand. My son walked slowly, his steps heavy. He raised his right hand to swear the oath, and I noticed the faint tremor in his fingers. He sat, eyes lowered, voice subdued. Gregory's lawyer asked him simple questions. "Do you believe your mother is capable of managing her estate?" Daniel hesitated. The pause stretched unbearably long. Finally, in a voice almost too soft to hear, he said, I don't know." The lawyer pressed him. "But you have seen signs of confusion, haven't you?" Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes flicking briefly toward me before darting away. "She repeats things sometimes. She trusts the wrong people. I worry about her." His words stabbed, though they were less harsh than they might have been. Still, the betrayal was sharp. My son, my only child, had spoken against me. Yet even in that moment, I saw it. The way his hand trembled as he signed his testimony. The way his jaw clenched, the redness around his eyes. Shame flickered in him, fighting against fear. He was not entirely lost, not yet. When he stepped down, he avoided Serena's triumphant smile and Gregory's approving nod. Instead, he stared at the floor, as if the weight of his words had carved a hollow inside him. The judge called for a recess. As the gavel struck, I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Diana placed her hand on mine, whispering, "You're not beaten." "This is just the opening act." Donovan leaned closer. "We've let them play their hand. Now it's our turn." I looked toward the front of the courtroom, where the empty witness stand waited. My fear had not vanished, but beneath it ran something stronger, steadier, resolve. They had thrown their accusations, paraded their witnesses, even dragged Daniel into betraying me. But the truth was waiting, ready to step into the light. As the recess ended, I rose slowly, Harold's ring glinting faintly under the harsh lights. Tomorrow's verdict had not yet been written, and I would not leave without speaking mine. When the recess ended, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. Gregory leaned back in his chair with the smugness of a man who believed he had already won. Serena whispered to him, her eyes darting toward me with disdain that cut sharper than knives. Daniel sat stiff, his shoulders hunched, the weight of his testimony pressing visibly on him. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table, but Donovan's calm voice steadied me. "Now," he whispered, "we dismantle their house of cards." The judge called for the defense to begin. Donovan rose, straightening his jacket, his presence commanding the room not through theatrics, but through clarity. "Your Honor," he said, "we begin with Dr. Lehman, the physician who claims my client suffers from memory decline." The bailiff summoned him back to the stand. Dr. Lehman shifted uncomfortably as Donovan approached, carrying a folder in one hand. "Dr. Lehman," Donovan began, his tone sharp but polite. "You testified earlier that Mrs. Hale showed signs of confusion. On what date did you examine her?" The doctor cleared his throat. I believe it was in early August." "You believe?" Donovan pressed. Do you have medical notes, records, or any signed consent from Mrs. Hale documenting that exam? Dr. Lehman faltered. Well, not precisely. It was an informal evaluation. In other words, Donovan interrupted smoothly, you never met her at all, did you? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The doctor's face flushed. Mr. Vaughn approached me with concerns, and I... So Gregory Vaughn paid you for an opinion without an examination, Donovan said firmly. He lifted the folder in his hand. Meanwhile, here we have Dr. Moore, a licensed geriatric specialist who did examine Mrs. Hale. Thoroughly, over multiple visits. Dr. Moore will testify that not only is Mrs. Hale mentally sound, but her cognitive scores place her above average for her age. The judge raised an eyebrow, turning her attention fully on Dr. Lehman. He squirmed, unable to answer. Donovan let the silence stretch, then dismissed him with a simple, "No further questions." Next, Donovan called Dr. Moore to the stand. A man with kind eyes and a crisp white coat entered, carrying his report. He testified clearly and confidently. Mrs. Hale is fully competent. She demonstrates no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. She manages her own finances, keeps organized records, and engages actively in decision-making. She is more capable than many patients 10 years her junior. His words fell like stones of truth, heavy and undeniable. Serena's face paled, and Gregory's jaw clenched as if grinding down fury. Donovan turned back toward the judge. Your Honor, we submit Dr. Moore's evaluation as evidence. It directly contradicts the false testimony presented earlier. The judge nodded, accepting the documents. The tide in the room began to shift, like a current turning against the Vaughns. But Donovan wasn't finished. He paced slowly, letting the silence draw everyone's attention back to him. We have heard much today about Mrs. Hale's supposed confusion, her alleged instability. But what we have truly seen is a campaign, deliberate, organized, and malicious, to strip her of her dignity and her property. This court deserves the truth, and we intend to show it. He called Eleanor next. She walked to the stand with grace, her silver hair shining under the lights. She spoke warmly of our friendship, of the years we had spent tending gardens and hosting community events. She described how I had organized finances for the garden club, kept meticulous records, and helped others navigate difficult paperwork. When Gregory's lawyer attempted to rattle her, asking, "Isn't it possible Mrs. Hale is declining and you simply don't notice because of affection?" Eleanor only smiled. Affection doesn't blind me, sir. It sharpens my sight, and I see clearly that Rosemary is not the one confused here. Her words sparked quiet laughter from the benches, but more importantly, they rang with sincerity. Finally, Donovan turned back to the judge. We will present more evidence, Your Honor, but the pattern is already plain. Forged documents, false witnesses, paid doctors. This is not about protecting Rosemary Hale. It is about exploiting her. As he sat, I felt my chest expand with something I hadn't dared to breathe in for weeks. Hope. For once, the lies had not gone unanswered. For once, the truth had been spoken aloud where it could not be buried. I looked at Daniel. He shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes flicking, toward me and then away. For a brief moment, I saw the boy holding his kite again, begging me not to let go. His hand trembled where it rested on his knee. Shame was creeping into him. I could see it. The walls Serena and Gregory had built around him were beginning to crack. As the judge called for a short break, Serena leaned into Daniel's ear, whispering furiously. He pulled away, not meeting her eyes. Gregory frowned, his mask of control beginning to slip. Diana squeezed my hand. You see? The truth is shining through. They can't stop it now. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. But these tears were not from despair. They were from relief, from the fragile but growing belief that Harold's foresight and Donovan's strength were finally breaking the hold of lies. When the gavel struck again, summoning us back, I sat taller. They had launched their attack. Now the counter had begun. And tomorrow, the mansion, Harold's gift, and my dignity would speak louder than any smear. When the break ended and the courtroom filled again, the air felt charged, as though everyone sensed something was about to shift. Serena adjusted her pearl earrings with trembling hands. Gregory's jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack, and Daniel sat rigid, staring at the table as if it might swallow him whole. Donovan rose with a quiet certainty, carrying a stack of folders and a small flash drive. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that silenced even the whispers in the back row. Your Honor, the petitioners have claimed that Mrs. Hale is incapable of managing her estate. They have presented hearsay, forged papers, and a doctor's opinion unsupported by fact. We now present the truth. He began with the simplest piece, the no-claim agreement I had asked Daniel and Serena to sign weeks earlier when they attempted to enter the mansion. Donovan held it up. This shows Mrs. Hale's capacity not only to manage her finances, but to protect them prudently. She set boundaries, conditions, and documented them clearly. Next, he introduced Harold's notarized trust and the nullification contract dissolving Gregory's business leverage. Signed, sealed, and filed years ago, Donovan said. These documents alone make Gregory Vaughn's corporate claims null. He has no standing. His forged papers are just that, forgeries. I watched Gregory's face redden as the judge examined the signatures, her brow furrowing at the stark differences between Harold's genuine hand and the crooked imitation Gregory had peddled. Then Donovan reached for the flash drive. He held it carefully, like a blade unsheathed at last. And now, Your Honor, a message from the man who built this house. The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered to life. Harold appeared on screen, sitting at his desk, his voice weary but resolute. Rose, if you're watching this, it means someone is trying to take what we built. This house is yours. Protect it. Don't let greed rewrite what love created. He lifted the documents to the camera, naming them clearly. These confirm it is yours alone. And if Daniel forgets, remind him. With love if you can, with strength if you must. The courtroom was silent. Not even the shuffling of papers, not even a cough. Serena's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of panic she couldn't quite control. Gregory's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Daniel's face crumpled. He pressed his lips together, his eyes glistening as Harold's voice echoed through the chamber. When the video ended, Donovan let the silence linger. Then he said softly, "That is Harold Hale himself, speaking with full intent, authenticated by forensic IT experts. His words, his face, his signature, that is the truth." The judge leaned back, her expression unreadable, but I saw the shift in her eyes. The walls Gregory and Serena had built around their lies had begun to collapse. But Donovan wasn't finished. "There is one more piece," he said. He opened another folder and produced a series of still images and a full recording from my cameras. The petitioners circulated a video implying that Mrs. Hale admitted to being nothing more than an ATM. What they did not show was the unedited recording. This, Your Honor, shows Serena mocking her. Daniel pressed to speak words he clearly regretted, and Mrs. Hale's refusal to surrender. It shows coercion, not incapacity. The monitor lit again. This time, the grainy clip of that dinner played in full. Guests laughed uncomfortably as Serena called me an ATM. My tired laugh, now in context, sounded like what it was: an attempt to diffuse cruelty, not agreement. The footage captured Daniel's discomfort, Serena's manipulative grin, and Gregory's approving nod. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A woman in the back shook her head in disgust. Serena's face went pale, her composure cracking as whispers spread among the observers. Donovan closed his case with quiet force. Your Honor, these are not the signs of a woman in decline. These are the actions of a woman under attack, who has nonetheless remained organized, clear, and capable. The true incapacity here lies in the petitioner's morality. Rosemary Hale is not confused. She is being exploited. The judge folded her hands, her expression grave. The court will review all evidence before ruling. As we sat, Diana leaned close and whispered, Harold's voice. It was like he was here with us. I nodded, tears streaming down my cheeks, though I did not wipe them away. They were not tears of defeat, but of vindication. Harold had spoken for me when I felt silenced, and now the truth stood undeniable in the very room where Serena had hoped to see me broken. Across the aisle, Daniel's shoulders shook. He buried his face in his hands, while Serena tugged at his sleeve, whispering furiously. He pulled away, refusing to look at her. For the first time, I saw the grip she had on him loosening. Gregory sat stone still, his lips pressed into a thin line. For once, he had no words. The gavel struck, signaling the close of the day's session. We would return tomorrow for final arguments, but already the battle had turned. I rose slowly, Harold's ring gleaming faintly in the courthouse light, and whispered to myself, We are winning, Harold. We are winning. The final day of the hearing dawned gray and solemn, the kind of morning that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy quilt. When I entered the courtroom, I felt every eye turn toward me. Gregory sat stiff, his lips drawn tight. Serena adjusted her blouse and tried to look composed, though the pallor of her face betrayed her fear. Daniel slumped in his chair, his gaze distant, as though he were adrift between two worlds. The judge began by reviewing the evidence once more. Harold's notarized trust, Dr. Moore's evaluation, the retraction letter from Mr. Green, and the authenticated video of Harold himself. Each document, each word, felt like a stone laid firmly into the foundation of truth. I sat tall, Harold's ring cool against my finger, and waited. When it was my turn to speak, Donovan rose. Your Honor, Mrs. Hale would like to address the court directly. The judge nodded. Mrs. Hale, you may proceed. I stood slowly, every joint in my body aching with the weight of what I carried, but my voice, when it came, was steady. I held in my hand a small family photograph, Daniel at 8 years old, grinning between Harold and me. My thumb traced the edges as I stepped toward the bench. I am not here as a bank account, I began, my words ringing clear. I am not here as a machine to be used until it breaks. I am here as a wife, a mother, a woman who has lived 72 years with dignity. I raised my son with love. I built this home with my husband's devotion, and I have managed my life with care. What you see before you is not confusion, but heartbreak. I set the photograph on the evidence table, beside Harold's ring that I had taken from my finger. This ring belonged to Harold. He built the mansion with his own hands and his own sweat. He said to me once, "This house is for us, Rose. It will stand as long as our love stands." And it has. Until now, I turned to look at Daniel. His eyes were wet, his jaw trembling. "Daniel, my son, I never wanted a war with you. I wanted only to see you happy, to see you build your life with someone you love. But when you asked me to give up everything, when you said the best gift was if I left forever, you cut deeper than any blade. That was not love speaking. That was fear, or pressure, or greed whispering in your ear. And I will not let those whispers erase your father's legacy." The room was silent, but for the sound of my breath. I lifted the old photograph high enough for the judge to see. This is the boy I raised. This is the family Harold and I built. And this house, this mansion, is not for sale to ambition or manipulation. It is the vessel of that love, and I will guard it until the day I die. My voice caught, but I steadied it. Harold built this house for us. It will never belong to anyone else. I placed the photograph and the ring together, side by side, and stepped back. The judge studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned her attention to Gregory and Serena. "Do you have anything further to present?" Gregory opened his mouth, but no words came. Serena fidgeted, her lips pressed into a thin, desperate line. Daniel sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the photograph, his shoulders trembling. At last, the judge spoke. "Having considered all evidence, testimony, and records, the court finds no grounds to question Mrs. Hale's capacity. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied. Furthermore, ownership of the mansion remains vested solely in Mrs. Rosemary Hale. The petitioner's claims of corporate ties are dismissed as fraudulent." The gavel struck, the sound reverberating through the chamber like thunder. For a moment, I could not move. Relief swept through me, sharp and overwhelming. Diana grasped my hand, her tears matching mine. Donovan gave a small nod, his face composed but his eyes shining with victory. Across the aisle, Serena gasped, her composure shattering at last. She turned to Daniel, whispering frantically, but he pulled his arm away, refusing to meet her gaze. Gregory sat rigid, his face a mask of fury. I gathered the photograph and Harold's ring, slipping it back onto my finger. I whispered softly, "We did it, Harold. We kept it safe." As I turned to leave the courtroom, I felt the weight lift, not completely, but enough for me to walk with dignity. The battle for the mansion was won. But another battle, one for healing, one for my son, still lingered in the shadows of tomorrow. The wedding was set for Saturday evening, though after the court ruling, I wondered if it would truly happen. Still, the Vaughns pressed forward, desperate to salvage pride. Invitations had gone out to hundreds. Caterers bustled. Florists filled the mansion with blooms weeks earlier, and the grand piano in the hall gleamed under the polished chandeliers. But on that morning, the house was no longer theirs to flaunt. It was mine, and I had made my choice. Donovan helped finalize the sale the very night after the judge's ruling. The real estate group had transferred the funds without delay, and by dawn, the mansion was no longer Hale property. It was sold irrevocably to strangers. The Vaughns had fought for nothing but air. I arrived at the mansion hours before the ceremony, dressed in a simple navy suit. The staff moved around me, assuming I was there reluctantly, perhaps to attend out of duty. None of them knew what I carried in my bag. The guests began arriving at sunset. Luxury cars lined the drive, women in gowns glittering as they swept into the hall, men in tuxedos adjusting ties. Champagne flowed, violins played, laughter rose in waves. Serena floated among them like a queen, radiant in her gown, her arm looped through Daniel's. Gregory followed close, basking in the glow of borrowed grandeur. I stayed in the shadows, unnoticed, until the music paused. Then I stepped forward, laying a thick envelope on the polished surface of the grand piano. The sound echoed in the hall, silencing the chatter. Heads turned. Serena's smile faltered when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice sharp despite the hush. I looked at her calmly. "I came to leave a gift." Whispers rippled through the room. A guest near the piano reached out and flipped open the envelope. Inside was the contract of sale, signed and sealed, the ink still fresh. He read aloud without meaning to. "Transfer of property. $7 million. Effective immediately." Gasps spread like wildfire. Murmurs swelled into disbelief. "Sold?" someone whispered. "The mansion is gone?" Serena's face blanched. She snatched the envelope from the piano, scanning the papers with frantic eyes. This can't be real," she cried. Gregory rushed to her side, grabbing the documents. His face turned crimson as he realized their authenticity. The seal, the signatures, the notarization. Undeniable. "She sold it," he muttered hoarsely. "She actually sold it." The guests erupted. Some laughed nervously, others whispered behind raised hands. A few pulled out their phones, capturing the moment Serena's perfect wedding shattered. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, his lips parted as if words had deserted him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Shame, perhaps, or regret. But he said nothing. I turned toward the crowd, my voice carrying without needing to shout. This mansion was built by Harold Hale, for his family, for love. But when love was replaced by greed, it ceased to be ours. I will not watch it turned into a stage for humiliation or a prize for manipulation. So I sold it. Tonight, you stand in a house that no longer belongs to you. The wedding you planned here is canceled. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the rustle of gowns and the uneasy shifting of shoes on marble. Then the whispers grew louder. "Canceled? She sold it. What will they do now?" Serena's composure cracked. She turned on Daniel, her voice shrill. "You promised me this house. You said it would be ours." Daniel's face crumpled, his hand trembling at his side. He looked between Serena, Gregory, and me, but words refused to form. His silence was its own confession. Gregory tried to regain control, raising his voice above the murmurs. "This is fraud. She can't just—" Donovan, who had quietly stepped into the room, cut him off smoothly. "It's legal. Fully executed. The funds cleared last night. The mansion, no longer belongs to Mrs. Hale, nor to you." "You lost," Gregory gasps, gave way to scattered applause. Hesitant at first, then swelling. Not for me, not even for justice, but for the drama unfolding before their eyes. Guests drank in Serena's humiliation, Gregory's fury, Daniel's shame. Their whispers turned sharp. "A TM no more." She turned the tables. Imagine, on their wedding night. Serena's eyes filled with tears of rage. She flung the papers at the piano, her voice breaking. "You ruined everything." I met her gaze, unflinching. No, Serena. You ruined yourself. I simply refused to let you use me any longer. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the chatter, the stares, the gasps trailing behind me. I didn't need to see more. I had already seen Serena stripped of her mask, Gregory silenced, Daniel hollow with regret. That was enough. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. The mansion glowed behind me, filled with guests whose laughter had turned sharp, whose whispers would follow Serena and Gregory for years. They had wanted spectacle, and they got one, just not the kind they had planned. As I stepped into the waiting car, I whispered to Harold's memory, "The house is safe, love." Not in their hands, never in theirs. The morning after the wedding that never was, I sat in a modest condo on the edge of town, sunlight streaming across freshly painted walls. Gone were the chandeliers, the sweeping staircase, the grand piano that had once held so many secrets. Here, the furniture was simple, the space smaller, but the air felt lighter. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of constant battles pressing against my chest. The funds from the mansion's sale had long since cleared, sitting quietly in my account, untouched except for one transfer. I had signed a check for $1 million to a national elder abuse prevention fund, ensuring that other women like me, would have access to resources and legal help. As I sealed the envelope, I felt Harold's presence close by, as if he approved. It wasn't just about keeping the mansion from greedy hands anymore. It was about creating something good from ashes. Diana came by often, her laughter filling the smaller rooms with warmth. We cooked simple meals together, drinking tea at the little table near the balcony, watching sparrows dart across the sky. "You look freer here," she said one afternoon, resting her hand over mine. "It may not be marble floors and chandeliers, but it's yours." Entirely yours. And she was right. Freedom was not measured in square footage or property value. It was measured in dignity restored, in the quiet certainty that I no longer lived in a house haunted by betrayal. Eleanor visited too, bringing fresh flowers from the garden club. She placed them in a vase and smiled. "You've inspired so many of us, Rose. People talk about what you did, not with pity, but with admiration. You showed them that it's never too late to stand, never too late to claim your worth." I smiled softly. "It doesn't feel like victory." "Not entirely. There are losses that linger." She nodded knowingly. "Victory and loss often share the same table, but you chose yourself. That matters." Still, some nights, the ache returned. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, staring out at the city lights, and think of Daniel. He hadn't called since the wedding. No apologies, no explanations, only silence. I wondered if he hated me, or if he hated himself. I wondered if he still replayed Harold's voice in his mind, the way I did, reminding him of what he had betrayed. One evening, Diana handed me a small envelope. "This came for you." No return address, I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter in Daniel's handwriting, the ink smudged as if written in haste. But when I unfolded it, I found only a few words. "I don't know how to face you. I'm sorry." My chest tightened. The letter was unfinished, unsigned. It was a fragment, a whisper, but it was enough to stir something deep inside me. He was still out there, torn between Serena's ruins and the boy he once had been. The door wasn't closed, not completely. I tucked the letter into my ledger, between the pages where I had written every wound and every stand I had taken. It didn't erase the pain, but it left a trace of hope. Healing, I had learned, was not a single moment of triumph, but a slow, uneven journey. Months passed, and life settled into rhythm. I tended to potted plants on my balcony, joined Eleanor again at the garden club, and walked with Diana through the park on crisp mornings. The city felt different when I walked as a woman unburdened, not as prey, but as survivor. And yet, whenever people at the club whispered about Serena's disgrace, about how guests at the wedding still repeated the story of the piano, the envelope, the mansion sold from under her, I did not gloat. I only listened quietly. Justice had been served in silence, without screaming, without spectacle. That was enough. On the anniversary of Harold's passing, I returned to the cemetery. I laid fresh roses at his grave and pressed my hand against the stone. "It's done, Harold," I whispered. "They didn't win." "You were right. The house was never about bricks and glass. It was about us. And though I let it go, I kept what mattered. I kept myself." The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and for a moment, I swore I could hear his voice in it, soft and steady. "You did well, Rose." I closed my eyes, letting the peace wash over me. When I returned home, the condo glowed in the evening light. I sat at my desk, opened my ledger one final time, and wrote the last entry. The machine is broken. The house is gone. But I remain. Then I slipped Daniel's unfinished letter inside, a quiet reminder that some stories do not end neatly. Some leave threads for tomorrow. As night fell, I looked out over the balcony. The city stretched before me, alive with possibility. I whispered to myself, to Harold, to every woman who had ever been silenced, "It's never too late." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.